Welcome to another Q&A with Telgorithm. My name is Samantha. I'm a marketing manager here at Telgorithm, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Very happy to have you. Thank you for joining. I am joined, of course, by our insightful and knowledgeable speaker, Telgorithm CEO and co-founder, Aaron Alter. Welcome, Aaron.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for joining. As always, it's a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Okay, so yeah, like Aaron said, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be here to discuss what it means to stay in control of your SMS and MMS messaging. I am going to give you a peek at the agenda for today's Q&A. Essentially, we're going to be covering some base material, some tactical tips, but we'll be accepting your questions throughout the entire Q&A. We'll also have a segment at the end just for Q&A. So if you don't have your question ready, you can hold it, but please use the Q&A on your Zoom screen or go ahead and submit in the chat. Either way is fine. We have moderators on the back end watching those. If we miss your question, if we don't have time to get to it, we will be reaching out to you individually after the Q&A session. So no worries, we've got your back. But yeah, we have a lot to talk about, so we're going to go ahead and just dive right in. But we're going to start with a question for you. So a lot of you are probably very well aware that it's a major week if your business is sending 10DLC messaging traffic. There is a Twilio cutoff deadline just days away from this stream where unregistered 10DLC messaging traffic will be cut off entirely. So we want to ask, just so we understand at the very top, are you anticipating 10DLC traffic cutoffs on August 31st? Yes, no, you're not sure, you don't know how many messages you have registered. Let us know what's going on for your business. Okay. All right, guys, thank you for participating. That's so interesting to see that, you know, there are some that are not, and that are not even sure. Okay, well, with that being said,
For sure. Thanks for sharing that info with us. And that's why we do a lot of these Q&A sessions. And I'll also quickly and briefly plug our other audio video collateral that we put out there all the time. A lot of what Telgorithm does is we like to educate the industry more than anything about what is actually going on here in this world of A2P 10DLC. And this is where we specialize in this specific area. Matter of fact, many times people think we're Telgorithm is like a plugin to a Twilio or a Bandwidth or a Plevo. And we actually take that as a compliment, even though we are not a plugin. We are essentially another cloud communication messaging provider. But where we specialize is so unique and it is so needed that folks sometimes get confused early on thinking that we are just that, but we are not that. And that said, based on the survey, so for those of you that basically said yes here, that you're going to be cut off on, in this case, it's Twilio just in a couple of days from now, please reach out to us immediately because Telgorithm has the ability to allow you to continue registering agnostically, which I'll talk to in a second, via unregistered traffic beyond August 31st. So Twilio is cut off on August 31st for anything that's unregistered. And if you're in that bucket, please reach out to us immediately as we have steps, and we'll talk about those a little bit later on, to make sure you don't experience a disruption at all while you still work on the process of becoming registered. But for those of you that are already registered or don't have cutoffs, you're dealing with a vendor that is not cutting you off. If this has taught us anything, how do you know your vendor tomorrow won't announce that next week you're going to be cut off and you might be caught SOL? So clearly, this is less of a reason to say, oh, I'm not being cut off anyways. Let me ignore going about the process of registering your local phone numbers or your 10DLC numbers because you never know, you might be cut off tomorrow. But even more than that, there are higher pass-through fees that are constantly being hiked. They're being hiked further, I believe, in September as well, for those that still allow unregistered traffic, and then filtering, and eventually this traffic that is unregistered eventually for all providers will be cut off. So you definitely don't want to be waiting here or being reliant on a path permanently, even if your current provider today is still allowing you to send unregistered traffic. And speaking of which, I think it would be agreeable for anyone here that if you want to remain on local phone numbers in the shorter to longer term, you want to make sure you're partnering with a provider that allows you to set yourself up correctly and properly. And so if we want to scoot over a little bit to the next slide here, Samantha, and by the way, thanks for putting this all together as always. So there is a concept in the campaign registry of brands and campaigns, but also CSP versus reseller. And I've discussed this in prior sessions we've had, and you can check those out. And actually, we interviewed the vice president of the campaign registry last year, discussing just this subject here. But a lot of what today's Q&A session is about is taking control, you having the control of your messaging and your messaging stack, and taking away controls from your messaging provider. That is especially not necessary, keeping you agnostic and in a better position as you navigate the cloud text communication ecosystem. And particularly when it comes to campaign registration, many folks are not aware of is that when the campaign registry was created, there were two different entities that were created. We'll call for what's known as ISVs, or a application. If you provide an application to your customer that allows them to send text messages, there were two essentially entity types that were created. One is known as a reseller, and one is known as a CSP, a campaign service provider. So I'm just going to break it down simply here, and I'll tell you what they both are, and then I'll tell you a little bit of a way to tell if you are or you are not, if you already have registered traffic or you're going about that process, how you're going about it. And it's important to understand this distinction because there are heavy, heavy ramifications if you don't understand this distinction early on, and you could potentially dig yourself into a hole. And so a reseller, the concept of a reseller in the campaign registry created that entity, is for an entity that resells. So as an example, Telgorithm, as I mentioned, is a cloud messaging API. Our APIs, our text messaging APIs, power applications. Now, if someone was to white label Telgorithm's APIs and resell our APIs to other businesses that has applications, that would be considered a reseller. However, most of the folks that we actually talk to are not a reseller of any cloud communication API at all. What they are is they are a campaign service provider. This means that you have an application that your customers log into to send and receive messages to communicate with their customers, aka you have an application or a service that supports brands communicating with its customers. And if you go to campaignregistry.com, which is the only accurate source of truth, this is the company that the network operators have partnered with, and you hit the register button, it will clearly define this for you. So again, you should not be registering as a reseller unless you are white labeling Twilio or Plivo, whoever it is, APIs, and reselling APIs. Again, I'm going to go on a limb here to say that most people joining today are not in the business of reselling any cloud communications providers APIs. Rather, you have an application that is powered by their APIs, and that application is used to support brands who communicate with their customers. Hence, you should be registering as a CSP properly in the ecosystem. So that's firstly the difference at a high level between a reseller and a CSP. Now, how do you register as a CSP, and why is this important? So the way you'll know if you're registered as a CSP or not is when you get your customers' information. Your customers are brands. They are required to provide a tax ID and a legal name, for instance, to register their brand. Well, if you're taking this information and you're giving it to a Twilio or a Plivo or whoever it is, then they are taking that information and putting that information into their CSP account, listing you guys as a reseller. And that means that your brands and your campaigns belong to your provider's CSP account, which is not proper, not correct, and that is also not transferable. When you go to be a CSP, the proper way is to go to campaignregistry.com, the registry directly as it was intended. And what you do is you register there as a CSP. You create your brands and their corresponding campaigns directly in the campaign registry itself. They have an easy to use portal, they have an easy to use API, and they bill you directly as well. And then in that process, you get to elect your connectivity partner. You see, the campaign registry is a certificate authority, basically an approval authority to get you approved and your customers approved for what they will be sending. And then you need to then find a provider that will properly support the approvals that you and your customers are paying to have. And so the idea is you take your brands and your campaigns and you use the registry's portal, the registry's very easy to use RESTful APIs in creating your brands and campaigns. And that keeps you vendor agnostic. You also have visibility to when your campaigns actually get approved and their timelines as well. So one of the things we hear a lot is I submitted a campaign to my current provider. I thought it was approved, but yes, they told me it was unregistered traffic, or their approval is taking really, really long, or it was rejected for X reason, and they don't even know the reason why. You have no visibility into that. Matter of fact, we even tell people sometimes you could send an email directly to support@campaignregistry.com, anyone can, and ask them the next time your provider rejects your campaign, if they even have a log of the campaign. Shockingly, we found out that many times the registry has no log or record of a campaign, let alone a rejection for the campaign. And so the idea here is you have no ownership and no visibility, and you're locking and entrenching yourself in with a provider. Even if the provider is amazing, you should keep yourself agnostic. Bringing you and having control of the compliance part of your stack is super important. So again, as you're going about registration, and even if you've already dug yourself a hole, here is ways to dig yourself out, but also make sure at least that going forward, your provider will support you properly as a CSP. And if they don't, then they are not the proper provider for you to support you on A2P 10DLC. So if some providers, they're very hesitant for various reasons, you can imagine, to support CSPs properly. If that is the case, then that is not the right provider for you as you continue to use and as you migrate and continue to use A2P 10DLC. So those are just some things to discuss here at a high level with regards to basic campaign registration. Again, this is not something that's a nicety. This is something that if you are a campaign service provider, you need to be reaching out to the registry and register there as a direct CSP. This has nothing to do with Telgorithm at all. This just has to do with the proper way to register with the campaign registry as a CSP.
Awesome. Cool. Before we move on, we have a question. We actually have two questions that are related to each other. These are regarding the Twilio cutoff deadline that we spoke about just a moment ago. So it was asked, is it true that the August 31st cutoff is only for Twilio or for every SMS provider? Is it self-inflicted?
So the self-inflicted part, you can use your own imagination. I won't address that directly, but as far as your actual question, that is correct. So Twilio and many providers use a very specific DCA or a direct connect aggregator. And that aggregator specifically for Twilio's case has put a block in place for August 31st. That is not the case for other providers that use this same aggregator. So yes, the August 31st cutoff that is posted on Twilio's website is for them specifically. So any Twilio customers or any Twilio traffic that is not fully campaign DCA approved by this Thursday, essentially that traffic that is associated will not be higher carrier pass-through fees, not more filtering, will cease on September 1st. And so just to be clear, yes, that is a Twilio specific cutoff, and that is a cutoff. It's not a filtering, it's not a higher pass-through fee. It is a complete shutdown of unregistered traffic on Twilio. So in other words, September 1st, there will no longer be a concept specifically on Twilio of having a phone number, sending text messages from a local or 10DLC phone number that is not associated with a fully approved, DCA approved campaign.
Okay. And the second question I actually like, when is Telgorithm's cutoff?
Telgorithm does not have a cutoff. So,
why?
Okay. So as I mentioned before, a lot of the question here was specifically to Twilio's situation. I don't want to give any hypothetical scenarios to why they were specifically put into a situation where they had to do that. There's various reasons for that. But what I could say is, in general, for the general industry, there are various providers that are given potentially different dates from DCA where they'd like to push them. And I'll actually, let me take a step back here on this question as well. So I talked about this on prior Q&A sessions. Basically, over the last 3+ years, by the way, registration has been available for 3 years. Some people, unfortunately, this is no one's fault because of lack of information in this, and you think that registration just started 2 months ago or less. Actually, registration has been available since 2020. Twilio made it available in 2021, but it's actually been available since 2020. And so when A2P 10DLC was created by the network operators back in 2020, they didn't do it as a nicety. They did it to create a sanctioned path for businesses to communicate with customers in a clean path and a way where that could support higher throughput, but they didn't do it as a nicety. They actually had to create some ways to basically entice businesses to move over from the old unsanctioned person-to-person or P2P path. And so they essentially used 3 levers to do this. One was hiking carrier pass-through fees, tightening up filtering, and then blockages. So there's a mixture of those. And depending on your relationship with a given DCA, you could have any mixture at any given time of this. It could be a block, it could be a higher pass-through fee, it could be a block and then a higher pass-through fee. For some, it could be higher pass-through from some and then no block, but just heavier filtering. And so in Twilio's case, again, I don't want to get into their specific reasons. There was a decision made by the DCA that they use that their specific account must have all of their numbers registered, not higher pass-through fees, not heavier filtering by the 31st. That same requirement was not put in place by other vendors or other DCAs. There are other DCAs besides the one they use for that, but there are higher carrier pass-through fees and higher filtering, and there can be announced cutoffs at any time. But at this time, for the DCAs that we are partnering with, which are the largest in North America, we do not have that cutoff of traffic happening on August 31st. That is not the case with our setup here at Telgorithm. Sure, there are others as well, but that's not the case for us.
I think it's also important to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't really allow unregistered traffic to be running unless it's in between stages of getting registered.
Good point.
Correct?
Yes, that's a very good point, and thanks for bringing that up. So Telgorithm, a lot of what as I mentioned up front, and we've discussed many times, we are very niche and are experts in one thing and only offer one thing, and that is texting traffic that primarily supports A2P 10DLC. And so the goal of Telgorithm has always been is to work on a path that makes it easy for campaign service providers to register their traffic and then to support their traffic once registered. It doesn't end with registration, as we're going to talk to soon as well, which many are unaware of, unfortunately. So we provide a path that makes it easy, but we also created a tech that makes sure that we're supporting clean traffic. We talk to all of our customers up front. We understand your business. We understand if Telgorithm is going to be the right, foot for you. Is this the right shoe for your foot situation? So we also have built tech that manages and monitors to make sure that folks are sending compliant traffic. And because this is very niche and very specific, and we've built unique tech and relationship around this, it has allowed us the ability in the industry of what's known as KYC, which means know your customer. So we know all of our customers very well because we have a tech and we go through a screening process that allows us to determine to make sure we have the right customers. And on the back end, that allows us to build a trust and has allowed us to build a trust with the DCAs that have allowed us to send unregistered traffic to prevent disruptions while you're working on a path to becoming registered. So this is not a permanent path. Hey, let me switch to Telgorithm because they support unregistered traffic. To the contrary, you must have a shared campaign with Telgorithm. A number must be associated with a shared campaign. Doesn't have to be DC approved yet. A shared campaign with Telgorithm in order to send unregistered traffic. So you need to create a campaign and share it with us. And during that process, we allow traffic to, because again, the idea is we are creating a path to prevent disruption and downtime while you're working on getting your campaigns approved, which we help with and provide a lot of guidance to. So this is not just, hey, we're the new safe haven for unregistered traffic. This is more of, everyone needs to get registered regardless. And we're just working on a path to make it easier for you to get there without a disruption or without an egregious cutoff date, to make sure that, you have ample time to get to your ultimate goal, which is registration. Thanks for pointing that out. That's an important point, Samantha.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so our next topic is still in line with staying in control. It's about brand and campaign rejections. And I'm phrasing this because we actually got 2 questions in the chat relating to this, Aaron. So maybe I'll start with one of the questions and then we can get into the slide. Okay, so this question is, for campaigns that were approved prior to keywords and opt-in, opt-out help messages being required, before those were required, could they potentially be required to update to the current standards?
One more time. With regards to opt-in.
Yeah, so for campaigns that were approved prior to keywords and opt-in, opt-out help messages being required, could they potentially be required to update to the current standards?
Good question. No. So right now, when it comes to approval, let's talk about approval high level. How does it work? What is the mechanics of it? So right now, for the most part, is you share a campaign as a CSP with your connectivity partner. Let's just say share it with Telgorithm. Telgorithm takes a look at this campaign. We have an automation where if we know you are ready, we automatically streamline that and we send this campaign upstream. Now at DCA, currently, the Direct Connect aggregator, these are the companies that send your messages directly to the T-Mobile and such. They have a person there that manually, I repeat, manually, a person manually looks at every single campaign. It looks at the call to action section. It looks under the brand. It goes to the website that is under the brand, and it looks at the samples under the brand to make sure that everything is legit and is there. And if they detect anything that's off, and we could talk high level to some of those things that they're looking for because it's dynamically changing, it can lead to a rejection. You might have to fix something, some items which were just mentioned here. However, once you get your campaign DCA approved, the DCA will never look at that campaign again unless they have a reason to. What do you mean a reason to? So when you register a campaign, one of the big things multiple times, and you're actually having to describe it now, you say that I gather explicit opt-in from all of my end users. Okay, great. You gather opt-in from all of your end users. Now, you get your campaign approved and you start sending traffic. All of a sudden, T-Mobile starts to notice a bunch of people responding with stop, cancel, unsubscribe, or worse language, basically stop messaging me. T-Mobile does monitor, and as all the network operators do, opt-out rates very aggressively. And if they see that rate start to grow, it will immediately set off a flag. They can suspend a campaign instantly, but many times, usually it's a first offense. They'll send a message back downstream to DCA. Hey, I thought this customer they said they gathered opt-in from everyone. Okay, these 2 phone numbers, can you have them provide proof of who owns this number, who their customer is, and what was the date, and where specifically did they gather opt-in? Usually they'll give a 48-hour period for that. And if within 48 hours proof cannot be shown, they will permanently suspend that campaign. And so it's not about, you won't go to a campaign and reject it, but you can get a campaign suspended after approval if there's a violation to what you submitted in that campaign. So if in the past, and just to button up here, in the past, there was no call to action section at all in a campaign. It didn't exist 6 months ago. There was nothing there. So there is no concept of, oh, we're going to go back and now you have to re-edit all your campaigns that didn't have it to make sure you put it in there. This is more going forward. So going forward, any net new campaigns will require it. Previous campaigns are good to go unless they have a reason to have suspicion about it, in which case I gave you an example of how that can happen, and then that could lead to a campaign suspension. So that's essentially how that works. Speaking of which, here, a few things to note of late is a couple of points here. The call to action section in all campaigns is the area where you describe how you gather opt-in directly from the end users that the phone numbers associated with this campaign will be sending messages to. That's what you have to describe clearly in that area. However, let's just say, for example, you say in this area, I get opt-in over the phone. Now, a DCA has no way to know that. How would they know if somebody's filling out an application and they get the opt-in over the phone? How would they know that? So what the DCA does now is every brand requires a brand matching website that is established, not a landing page, established. They will go to that website and they will click on the contact us link. They will click in the privacy policy sometimes. They will look for any form on that website that mandatorily collects a phone number. And if there is no opt-in language on that form, they will reject the campaign, even though in the call to action section, you said, I gather it over the phone or I gather it in person. If they detect and find any area that is not compliant, regardless of what you stated in the call to action section, they will reject that campaign. And so just putting that out there. In addition, now they are more looking at privacy policies without clear third-party sharing terminologies. Specifically, if you're sharing just randomly with third-party providers and they look at your privacy policy and see that, they will reject the campaign from that. So think about how far-fetched that is. But we're just here to provide guidance. Right now, if you say we collect your opt-in over the phone, and then your website has a privacy policy that has a third-party sharing language that they don't like, they could reject it because of that, even though everything else in the campaign is perfect. One other thing that was added of recent is when folks opt out or type help, you need to write out exactly what you respond back, what your response back will be. There's an area in the campaign registry where you have to put in keywords and describe the process for what happens if someone sends help or stop or cancel. And now they are looking to make sure that that area is filled out as well. That is within your control, and you could fill that out. And again, the brand that you're putting in the sample must match the brand's website, and it needs to be, again, an established looking website, not just a landing page with a logo on it. It must be an established website that matches the brand information, or you will lead to rejected scenarios, which can cause delay in the process and also added costs. So those are just some of the things that I'll add that have come apparent of recent that, again, the DCA is really looking at really closely. I would even say these are particularly have gotten really hot in this area over the last 2+ weeks.
That's for sure. We have a question that is fairly specific, so we'll reach out to you. Oh, it's anonymous. So we'll answer it at a higher level. This person has experienced 4 rounds of rejections without clear reasoning from their provider. Their question is, can Telgorithm help with something like this? How would you handle bringing someone on who maybe has experienced a bunch of rejections and doesn't know why?
Yes, very good question, and something that comes up commonly. So as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, we support primarily CSPs, not resellers. We don't allow anyone to resell our APIs. We only support primarily CSPs. That means, and on top of that, we only support CSPs that register properly. So in order to partner with Telgorithm at all, your first step is you got to go to the campaign registry itself directly and register as a campaign service provider. When you do this, and this is part of our process, you create your brands in your, not Telgorithm, in your campaign registry account and their campaigns. And this allows you to see in your TCR agnostic account exactly what has happened. So when you share this campaign with what's called your CNP, your connectivity partner Telgorithm, or any connectivity partner that will support you as a CSP, you will see when they accepted the campaign, you will see when they shared it upstream with their DCA, and you will see any rejections. Rejection reasons come directly to you. You could view them directly in the portal itself of the TCR. And you also get, they have webhooks that you could subscribe to where they'll send it to you in real time. When any DCA rejects in this ecosystem, they are required to write a detailed description there, and you will get that information directly. See, this is why You want to make sure you're not registering as a reseller because you're in a black box. You're giving tax IDs to your provider who owns everything you're saying. You have no way to validate if they're submitting anything. You have no way to validate if they're even charging you correctly or supporting anything. You're digging yourself in a hole because you don't even own the brands or campaigns, and you have no idea where you sent anything or what's going on. The proper way is to simply go to campaignregistry.com as the proper way as a CSP, where you will get billed directly from the TCR, and you will see all this information in real time and give you control to do that. There's also a big mistake and a big misunderstanding that many of these providers, unfortunately, have said, oh, we'll take care of all of this for you. We have this Trust Pilot or the Trust Hub or this Trust or that, whatever portals and APIs they created. We make this all easy for you. And that's also not true. That's false. The steps that are needed to be taken to register, or the amount of steps, is exactly the same, whether you go directly to the registry or whether you go and do them all at one provider. The difference is 5 steps are here and 5 steps are here versus 5 steps with one provider. The RESTful APIs that they had, that is completely false. That is false in every way possible. So again, there is no reason. Again, this is another one of those reasons I cannot stress enough. Campaign service providers must be going to the campaign registry, and you'll get all of this information, all of these answers, and have a way to track all this while owning your own compliance in that process. By the way, I'll add, we get no kickback from it. Our logo's on the site, the same way Twilio and others are, and the network operators. There is a $200 one-time fee to register as a CSP. Currently, the approval process to get approved is about a 2-week process, 2 to 3 weeks right now. Depending if you're talking to Telgorithm, we have good relationships over there. We could potentially help with expediting that. But that is the process of going there directly, and you could see this on campaignregistry.com.
Perfect. One more question before we move on. Is it required to register a separate brand and campaign for every single client that uses our SMS services?
Yes. So that's another good question. Unfortunately, one of these providers out there created this thing called a starter brand. I did a previous session on this entire subject as well. And when it came to sole proprietors and how that was used by mistake, and people bunching up a bunch of campaigns, which are customers under one brand. So you should check out our collateral and our videos besides this, but in a nutshell, just high level here, every brand, so that means every one of your customers, that's its own entity, that it's its own tax ID, or if it's a true sole proprietor, should be registered as its own separate entity in the campaign registry, not bungled together under one brand, who then has a bunch of campaigns. Brands are separate entities, and campaigns are separate use cases. Now, brands itself, you register them one-on-one. You might ask, well, why? I want to save some money. First of all, it's $4. I know if you have a lot of brands, it adds up. It's $4 one time to register a brand. But here's the story. If you take all of your customers and put them all under one brand, there's 2 things that are going to happen. One is a lot of the things that you get, I'm going to talk to those shortly, are higher throughputs. Well, throughputs are now set at a brand and campaign level. So if everyone, what might seem like a lot of throughput for one person, if you start bungling everyone together, you're not going to get a lot of throughput to fit your entire customer base under one brand. So number one to think about is your brands themselves and how they're all going to be sharing that same throughput versus every brand separately, and those campaigns get separate setups for that. Additionally, very important, point number 2 is if somebody messes up. So as I said before, somebody has an opt-out rate. Maybe they didn't have a clean list of opt-in customers, and an opt-out rate grows and someone doesn't respond. And for whatever reason, that campaign or brand gets suspended, you're going to have an entire outage for your entire platform customer base. And sometimes it could take time to unlock that if that happens. Not only that, I'm going to mention a third point. Right now, TCR is looking closely at that to see folks that do that. And if they detect folks doing that, they could suspend the brands just from that alone. So if they detect that multiple campaigns are being set up as brands instead of brands themselves, they could, just from finding that in and of itself, suspend those brands and campaigns. So There is literally no reason to put yourself in that hole, and that is not the proper way to do things. Every entity should be its own setup, and each campaign, now they have low volume campaigns, which are only $1.50 a month. Instead, in the old days, it used to be 10 for dedicated. And then you even have low volume mix. You could put multiple use cases up to 5 under one low volume campaign. So you have a process and a way to do that. I would not recommend, and if anyone has set themselves up in that way, you should work on a path to untangle yourself out of that, and fast, because they are cracking down on those things. Good question.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, so we're going to move on. That was all a lot of background that had not much to do with Telgorithm, other than the fact that as an API company, we really care about setting you up correctly. It benefits you in the long run. It makes you a better customer because you're set up and you have less issues. Like, that's what's important to us. But in terms of staying in control of your messaging, there is another element of it that we offer a lot for.
Yes.
Take it away.
So that's correct. So imagine this: you waited 2 months with some provider to register your campaigns. You went through all this headache. You paid, $4 for the brand. Maybe someone forced you to pay $40 for a campaign vetting fee that you wasn't aware of what it even was, to get higher throughput, or let alone whether they're supporting it. And then you spend $10 or $1.50 per month on this campaign, and I got my stuff through. I had my content right. My opt-ins are right. I don't have a lot of opt-out. Everything is all good. I'm done, right? And the answer is, unfortunately, no, you're not done. The entry ticket to get in is everything we just described. Well, what do I mean? So let's take an example. When you register for the campaign registry, people think you're registering for compliance. That's not what A2P 10DLC is about. Compliance is your entryway ticket to get into the ecosystem, but that's not the main sole purpose of it. A2P stands for, an alternative acronym for it is B2C, or business to consumer communication. See, prior to this rollout of this A2P, or application to person protocol path, what only existed from back in the 90s was person to person, right? Which was never intended for business to communication, and set off a lot of the issues, which is why this was ultimately rolled out. But the point is, one of the big differences between person to person, as we discussed in previous sessions, and A2B in a business communication, is throughputs, right? Obviously, I need a lot more throughput to run a Black Friday sale than me communicating with you by hand, by text message on my cell phone. And so that set a ton of problems. And that's why business to consumer communication now gives you, and this is with the entryway ticket of being compliant, to much higher throughputs. And this is a system and a process for getting you the proper throughputs as they should be. But let me give you an example. So when you register a brand, a given brand of yours, T-Mobile, as an example, sets a daily limit for that brand. So let's just say the lowest level, I'm telling you what it is 2,000 messages a day. When you first register any brand that becomes verified, they will instantly get 2,000 messages a day to T-Mobile at a brand. So let's think about this for a second. So one of my customers got approved for 2,000 messages a day to send to T-Mobile. Well, and AT&T is a different count. Verizon is a different count. So what happens if I send 2,001 messages that day? I hit a limit. It's not a lot. What's going to happen to that 2,001st message and beyond? I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. It's going to drop. So get this. You spent all this money, all this time, all this effort, and doing everything right, and your provider, and no one is tracking this for you, and you still all of a sudden notice, oh, wait, why are my messages dropping? Think about how much of an annoyance and disruption and heartache that would cause after spending all this time and money and effort on that. And so the point here is, it would be important for somebody to understand if there is a daily limit, and it's only 2,000 messages a day, not hard to hit that, even if you're conversing back and forth and have a few reps that are sharing, that are under that brand. Some people think they have a big misconception. Oh, I don't do any mass marketing. Well, if you have only 2,000 messages a day to T-Mobile, and you have 5 reps in a customer service thing that are just doing notifications or some two-way communication, you have 5 reps or less that are under that one brand, very likely, you could hit into that 2,000 messages a day very, very quickly. You'd be shocked and surprised. It's nothing to do with mass messaging on a BOGO sale on Black Friday. Any use case can hit into that fairly quickly. So if you're going to get a disruption at 2,000 messages, somebody needs to track that. But here's the interesting thing: who knows any of this information, right? Well, if it's a daily limit, well, when does this day start? Is it a rolling 24-hour period? Does it reset? When does T-Mobile reset their calculator daily? Is it midnight to midnight? If it's midnight to midnight, does it take daylight savings time into account? Metro PCS is a subsidiary of T-Mobile. So when I send a text message to a Metro PCS end user, are they included in the limit? Now, no one is talking about this, but yet if you go online, every single one of these providers, and we can count out all their error codes, have literally all created error codes that say you've exceeded your T-Mobile daily limit. That means it's too late. That means your message has already dropped and already gotten disruptions. It also means they are not managing or tracking that for you. Now, this is not a nicety. This is fundamental and crucial to the success on A2P 10DLC. And it's shocking that very few, if any, are tracking and managing this for you. Pretty much everyone assumes everyone else is, or folks are just very focused on registering now and are not even aware of this, that this is a whole area of complexity that once you're beyond the ticket of registration, you're going to run into some serious problems very, very fast. So Telgorithm understood this early on, and we found out not only from T-Mobile, from AT&T and Verizon and all the participating network operators, exactly what the throughputs are when their timer set. And we track this in real time, proactively, at a brand, at a campaign level, to make sure that you never are below capped, which many of them are doing, or exceed the throughputs you are approved for. So I'll just give you an example of how it works with Telgorithm. What we do is when you sign up with the campaign registry, you share a campaign with Telgorithm, the campaign registry automatically informs us of the approval information. We automatically import those approvals into your Telgorithm account for you, and we have a webhook that notifies you in real time that that's happened. What that allows us to do is download your approvals into our database, and we track and manage it. So, matter of fact, you send us say an API will say, hey, send this brand with this campaign with this associated phone number, wants to send a text message to T-Mobile. What we do is, prior to sending the message, we do a lookup on the fly into the registrar net number to determine the network operator and subsidiary of that, if there's a subsidiary involved, like Metro PCS, that they are about to send the message to, calculate out under this brand, based on their approval for this specific brand, how many they were approved to send in that day. And if they're 50% of that limit, we send an email alert letting you know this brand name of yours is at 50%. Please work through them or work with us on a path to get them higher throughput limits. 75%, another alert. 100%, if they reach that, we don't let the message drop. We queue the message and we wait until T-Mobile's timer resets daily, and then we send the message in. But you might say, hey, I don't want to send it, overnight. So we provide time routing that says, hey, Telgorithm, hold the message till 9 a.m. Or alternatively, I don't need to send the message altogether. Let's resend the message at no cost. We thought everyone was building this, as this is fundamental and crucial to the success of A2P 10DLC, let alone we found out pretty much, unfortunately, no one is doing that. It seems like, unfortunately, maybe not shockingly, no one cares, at least until folks start realizing this after they start registering. We proactively built it, and we uniquely offer that in our offering, and that is fundamental and crucial to the success of A2P 10DLC. Again, this is something that I directly discussed with the vice president of the campaign registry itself last year. So again, as you're thinking about providers that you want to use, you want to make sure you're using a provider that's going to manage all these throughputs that you're working hard to pay for, and that they're going to prevent disruptions in this area, and are working with you and providing the right guidance, and make sure you won't get disrupted in this process.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. We have a question on the topic of throughput. It's
First,
two-parter, so let me read through it. Okay. If you pay for vetting to get better throughput, and they said that the vendor they use has 2 different levels you can purchase, should it be automatically assumed that the brand should get better throughput? The second part says, I have a scenario where we paid the second tier of vetting, best of the best, then our score went down from the original vetting.
There's a lot of bits of information here that sound
Yeah.
inaccurate to me. I will
Okay.
explain briefly. I don't know how much time we have here about, and what I would say is, whoever asked that question, follow up with us. We'll provide you with actual campaign registry collateral that literally shows you exactly how risk scores and vetting works on the back end. What you just described is not accurate. So I don't know whoever gave you that information, but they were misinformed. I don't know if that was on purpose or by mistake. In a nutshell, here's how it works. When you register a campaign with the campaign registry looks at two things initially. They look at the tax ID and the actual business, the legal business name of this entity. They do a quick background check, and they check they use a certain third party that checks if the tax ID matches the legal name that you put on file. If there's a match, you'll become verified, a verified brand. What does verification get you initially by TCR? Verification gets you into the lowest classes, tiers and class with AT&T and T-Mobile. I believe that is 2,000 messages a day on T-Mobile, and it is 75 TPM, 75 texts per minute on AT&T. That's for SMS. You get into the lowest tier, unless there's only one caveat to that. You are a member of the Russell 3000. We'll assume today, most folks here today don't have customers that are. If they are, great. Then you go automatically to the top tier, to the highest level. Highest level currently is 4,500 TPM, if I'm not mistaken, on AT&T, and it's 200,000 messages a day in the tiered system. You can go beyond that with a special business review. But let's assume you're a regular normal brand, not on the Russell 3000. You become verified, and you're by default set with a 2,000 message daily limit on T-Mobile, and you want to heighten that. Here's how that works. There are three external vetting partners that the campaign registry has partnered with. One is Aegis, one is WMC Global, and one is Campaign Verify. Campaign Verify is used for political organizations. That's a separate subject. But within the campaign registry portal itself and their APIs, you have the ability to go under a given brand that had the initial setup, which by default, that's for everyone. You're at the lowest stage. And you could submit on the spot. There's a $40 one-time fee that they charge, regardless of the outcome, where they'll run an additional, more extensive background check than just the EIN number and the legal name. And depending on the outcome of that check, can potentially heighten the score above, I believe it's above 25, to risk score above 25. Now, depending on the bucket you get into, like I said, we have collateral that could share you exactly which buckets amount to what, but depending on where that vetting partner gets you, they're going to try to, hopefully you get 100. You get 100 as the highest score, or 75 to 100 gets you into the highest bracket. And then you'll get a proof that you can be rejected, which you can resubmit again. If anyone is telling you, oh, pay us this money and we'll get you this level, and pay us this money and we'll get you to this level, they are completely telling you inaccurate information. Whether it's for nefarious reasons or not, who knows? But that is not accurate. The way it works is, Aegis and WMC Global do not share their process of how they determine risk score. So it is really at your own risk. You pay a $40 fee. You can do a reapplication again. What we can do is I happen to know the CEOs of both of those companies very well. If you do get a rejection or your score is not high enough, and it could be they can make a mistake depending on the vendors they use, we could send an email and we could say, hey, can we get some information here? And sometimes they'll give a hint, share this, or we had a question about that. And that could potentially ultimately lead to the bracket that you're looking for. But that is the process I described, has nothing to do with Telgorithm. That is how the process is set in place right now. So anyone that has described something or is charging on the side for some brackets or whatever, that you be very careful with whoever that person or that company is, because that is not correct information. Hope that answers it.
Thank you. Okay, another poll. Last poll here. We just would like to know, what has prevented you so far from switching SMS API providers? If you don't mind sharing with us, we ask, is it about costs, internal resources, your stakeholders, you're currently in a contract that is binding with your provider, or you're just uncertain of where to go, or you just have general questions?
And thanks for everyone for spending the time with us today. Again, as you probably realized, Jeff, this is your first time, or if you're a repeat, we thank you for that. A lot of what we do is provide information. That's a lot of our mission, is to provide clarity and information. Aside from being a messaging provider, it's not just about, cut your costs, which cost does matter, but, what good is a service for nothing or no money if you're not going to get your messages delivered? And so that's the way we see that. We were customers ourselves prior to founding Telgorithm, and that's why this resonates a lot with us and why we built a service and technologies around making sure customers are actually successful. So appreciate everyone's time, help, and joining.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, it seems like the majority have uncertainty. Second to that is in a contract and internal resources. So thanks for sharing that with us. It's helpful insight. Okay, the last part of this Q&A and staying in control of your messaging is to let you know that you are not stuck.
Right. And so I think, and that this leads off of the survey that was just taken here. It showed the biggest one, if I'm not mistaken, was uncertainty. Of course, you know, and I'll give an example because I myself, earlier on in my career, I served as the head of telecom at a company called Service Titan at one point. They're a leading CRM in the home services industry. And I know what it's like to be a customer. And so many times, a lot of these applications will add text messaging to their product because it's very valuable to the customer. And they didn't do any research at the time. It could be the early stages of the company, but everyone heard of a brand name like Twilio. They were one of the first, and I'm just using their name arbitrarily, or it's a Pliva, whoever it is, Vonage. And then sure enough, they set up an integration. They don't know much of it, and they just scale out with that provider. They know nothing else about the ecosystem, nothing about the industry, nothing about porting numbers, and there's a lot of misconceptions. And so essentially they end up getting locked in with this one provider just because it was the first provider they chose because that's what they knew at the time. And it's very unfortunate that there's not a lot of clarity on this concept. And by the way, in general, we're big believers that people should multi-thread. No provider is perfect, and you should never just rely on one provider for anything. As back to my conversation before about registering yourself as a CSP. Just from that perspective alone, you can't even multi-thread. So something to think about. But what I'll say is, and I'll speak specifically to Telgorithm now because I can't speak to others, or I could speak at a high level to others. What in regards to myself, so as an example, being a customer myself at one point of a SaaS platform and supported text messaging, I didn't get the right customer service. I didn't get the right help. Things were failing. And so I had to look for other providers, which was initially complicated to figure all of these things out. And I thought things would be, complex. And so certain things were complex, right? Porting numbers. I don't want a disruption of my service, or I don't know what engineering times are going to look like. And so what we did when we founded Telgorithm, because we went down these rabbit holes and understood that, we ourselves created a process and technologies that make this process much easier than it would typically be in a typical scenario. And just to pick some out here, so let's talk about number porting, right? Many people are scared, and I'll get to the integration part in a second, but number porting, I port numbers, there's a big stigma in the industry. I don't want to port numbers, it can cause a disruption. That would be devastating. And there's no doubt that it would. And that's why we've gone through crazy measures to create an automated port API. So Telgorithm has created, so one of the big things is there's a gap between an API and what takes place at the carrier levels, right? So if you're sending a bunch of messages to your current provider and the numbers with the current provider, the problem is when you port the number to the new provider, your API doesn't know when that transition has occurred. And so hence it continues sending API calls to the legacy provider, and that causes disruption. That's typically many times what causes the disruption in that process. But if there was a way to bridge this gap between the real-time transaction of porting at the carrier level with the API level, then you could solve that problem. Because if your API knows the actual second in real time at the carrier level, at the number cutoff, it could simply just redirect its logic to the new provider and no disruption. And that's exactly what Telgorithm has built. We built a process and a subscription webhook that is tied in and integrated in real time at the carrier level that allows you proactively to know the exact moment your number has switched from your legacy provider to the new provider. So you just keep sending API calls, your legacy provider, literally to the second it transitions, and then you have everything pre-built on Telgorithm. Everything is set up, the number is loaded, the campaign is there, all your hooks are there, everything is pre-set up. And so the second that's there, literally it's seamless. Your customer wouldn't even know anything has happened. And we created a very easy API and webhook subscription that allows you to build that into your logic very quickly. As far as integration, go ahead. Were you raising your hand there?
Because I think this is an important question. What does it cost to port numbers?
We, Telgorithm, do not charge anything for porting numbers or porting away numbers.
Thank you.
The only thing we charge for is sending text messages. So we don't charge for anything. That's a good question. In general, there are costs. Now, can your current provider charge you for porting away? That's possible. Some of them do, some of them don't, depending on your scenario. We don't charge for any of that. So that's a good question, though. So again, we streamlined that process. And the one thing I will get to here is integrating itself. We have snippets, certain snippets of code that our APIs are very similar to legacy providers or the other providers you may be using. And you'd be shocked how fast, showing a basic engineer, that literally the difference in changing code that it is to integrate against Telgorithm. You could literally do it in a day or two. Integrate and set everything up and get going very, very quickly. I believe it is a big stigma and a falsity that it takes months and months and months to integrate against. I'm not saying sometimes people don't have unique infrastructures, and depending on the setup, they can, but most of the time, it's usually certain categories are mixed into the transition category, and they think, oh, I have to do this, this, and this all over again, where really the way that I like to put it is, if you already have the plug built, you're just taking the plug out of one outlet and literally putting it in a new outlet. You already have the plug built. And what's going on within the plug itself, sometimes there can be things that need to be changed. Most of the time, they're very minute. And so while it does sound like overwhelming, if you're dealing with a provider that is not properly supporting you, not saying it should be Telgorithm, although we'd love to help if we can, but you should not use, or you should check into specifically what a transition would look like. And it's not as crazy as you might think it to be. And there are processes that can streamline that process very, very fast and very quickly. And I know we're up on timer, so I'll mention one last point. Telgorithm is also a hosted text messaging provider. So what that means is, again, many folks, you may not be aware of this concept, unfortunately, for various reasons, this wasn't out there. But when you have a phone number, you could have voice on a phone number, and you could have text services on this phone number. What many don't know is that you don't need to use the same provider for both. What I mean by this is you could have your number with a Plivo for voice, and for the text messaging on this very same phone number at the same time, you could have Telgorithm as the text messaging provider. So you could have all your voice on this very same phone number, not a second phone number, the same phone number flowing through Plivo, while at the same, or any voice provider, while at the same time, Telgorithm services the messaging, or net new activates the messaging portion of this number. You see, the ecosystems in the telecommunications industry behind voice and messaging have nothing at all to do with each other. And like I said, we have streamlined that process. We actually we have an automated porting API that does that allows you to port just the text messaging portion of your number with zero disruption. And it's actually fairly quick to do that in many cases. So I just wanted to point that out. We are also a hosted messaging provider. You can keep your voice elsewhere if your voice is working great with your current provider, but it's just the messaging you need to figure out. You have the ability to do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. In the last minute, I think that we should just say that if you are currently facing the Twilio cutoff and you would like support, we can help minimize the disruptions. If you are not fully registered right now, please reach out to us and find out how we can do that if it wasn't answered in the Q&A. Any last words?
No, we are here to help. We're here to help. We understand that this industry many times has not been very forthcoming, and that's a lot of the reason why we founded Telgorithm. But we've built technologies, processes, and what we do is we help customers with their ultimate challenge, which is streamlining and making sure your messages get delivered. Of course, we can work with you on your rates because that's a part of the picture, but that's not what it's about. It's about making sure you have the right partner that will properly support you to make sure you're navigating this many times mission critical area of your product. And what I'll say is, give us a call, give our team a call, and you will be pleasantly surprised by the experience you'll get.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Yes. Thank you.
Great. Bye-bye.